Hi everybody, this is Hero from the Birds back with another Shadowlands video, and in this video I'm going to talk about raid leading, all things raid leading. I'm excited, I really enjoy this role, and for those of you who are participating in your raid groups as the raid leader, I'm hoping to offer you just some of my thoughts about being a raid leader, some things to think about, maybe some tips that can help you. This video is going to be slightly different from my usual videos, which tend to be a little more concise. I'm going to probably ramble, and that's because I really love this role, and different ideas will shine a light in my mind and get me going on a tangent. So I'll try to break it up as we go through, but just be advised if you're interested in certain kinds of things, stick with me or check out below the little dividing points and look at what interests you. So I got interested in raid leading in part because I really enjoy the tactical side of this game. I spend my time doing a lot of things, as you see in these other videos, exploring areas of the game or specs or classes or talents that are not usually taken. I'm very interested in analytical approaches to the game, meaning people who take the time to do the testing themselves in an actual in-game environment, learning how the mechanics of the game work. Maybe it's a spell interaction, maybe it's a mechanic in a boss, maybe it's the way two talents function together. All of those things fascinate me. I really enjoy those elements. I think Blizzard has made, in my view, a pretty successful game for that kind of engagement. And what raid leading does is it allows you to participate in that tactical stuff in two main ways. One is what we would call the strategic elements. So that means planning out either your comp or planning out the general approach of your raid to any given fight. We are going to stack for this part. Then we are going to use cooldowns for this part. Then we are going to turn and burn this one ad. Those kinds of major elements that you're going to showcase to your raiders. That strategic element, we'll call it kind of element number one, is largely solved for almost all of the guilds that enter into new content. As they watch World First Raiders participate and try their strategies. So a lot of the strategic elements is people will release guides often even before everything has even launched. You'll see people firing onto YouTube the guide, the definitive guide for 9.2, and people have only really looked at the PTR or done a few polls and stuff. And that's fine. All that means is that the strategic element only has a small portion to play of what the average raid leader is doing within their guild. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I think of as the tactical side of it, and then you might call it the political side of it, or the thing that the social side of it. But the strategic side still sometimes is important. And as an example, what happens often in raiding is you have people at the top of the game, those hardcore raiders who are pushing CE all the time. Those people are ready to put in all kinds of hours every day, often as soon as things launch. They are highly skilled, often highly competitive, and they need a certain kind of raid leader because they're raring to go. They have a kind of intensity and energy. They've read all the guides. They have combed through all the discords. They've found as much as information as they possibly can. They have their own ideas of what they want to do, and they're great. There's a difference between that, which on average has a high degree of engagement, versus what most of us experience in raiding, even if you're doing CE raiding, which is that you have a variation in engagement with your raiders. Some are more like raid loggers and enjoy lots of other games too. Some people are really actually only interested in Mythic Plus, and they raid. They're good players, but raid isn't really their focus, so they don't have a lot of energy into it. Some people don't have a lot of time to invest in it. And everyone's raid operates somewhere between those extremes of nobody cares and barely anyone knows anything, up to the hyper prepared. And as a raid leader, you kind of have to evaluate when we're talking about these three main elements: the strategic stuff, the tactical stuff, and then the social stuff in the middle. You have to evaluate what you're going to do with your own group. So the strategic stuff sometimes enters into that if nobody knows anything and no one has a clue, and or some people find it more difficult to understand the big picture idea. So you can kind of change your strategy to adopt it to meet the needs of those people. Some groups will say the only way to beat Huntsman, that Castle Nathria fight where you have the dogs, was to do immunity soaks. So if you recall, Huntsman fires an arrow, and what the intention of the authors of that fight was for people to stack in a line all of the raiders spread out between those three arrows to absorb the damage. Now, that would create many ghosts that would float and need to be healed up before they hit the boss, or it basically enrages the boss. In the standard way of doing that, you put a lot of pressure on two things: movement for all the DPS players, or all the players in general, to get in a line and organize themselves, and then the healers afterwards to heal up far more creatures or ghosts before they hit the boss. That's two giant pressure points that were resolved by having immunity classes soak the confluence of the three arrows, and if they put their immunity on, the arrows would go through, it would not kill the person who had been targeted, and you would have far fewer ghosts spawn. So it reduced immensely, that one strategy, it reduced immensely a bunch of movement on the part of all of the raid, and it reduced a bunch of healing. So that's often what happens in the strategic side of raid leading, is adjusting your group's ability to attend to those strategies that get invented often by the world first raiders. So there's some place to shape that. And a good example from our raid, when we did Guardian, I think when we swung through on Heroic, we had two prop paladins, myself and another, I think it was my brother at the time. And you know the huge slam that Guardian does? In Mythic, you have to soak that with a few people because it does too much damage. But I think on the heroic side, you could immune it entirely as a prop paladin. If you bubble taunted at the right time, you could absorb the entire hit and it would not do any damage to anybody. And we found that you could bounce back and forth those two final stand bubble taunts to basically negate that entire thing. What did that do for our group? Well, when we were learning fights like that, it helps to smooth out and give us more time to do mechanics, help your DPS to be more engaged, give them less to think about. So that strategy just worked for us for Heroic to try it out. It's just a small example. And these little things sometimes come up where a positional choice will help to resolve an issue. Another great one is the ads in the Soul Forge when Garrosh is screaming his head off and you have to pull in or mark all of the ads that get summoned in Phase 2. People started to use Death Knights because they had access through Necrolord to essentially 2 mass grips. So you could grip everything in, mark it with whoever had the mark, and then people could blow the ads up all at once. That resolved, strategically, an issue that would have to create or generate far more interaction for your group. So on the level of strategy, sometimes, depending on if your group's hyper intense down to really more casual, you can adjust the main flow of the strategy to suit your needs. But there's also what we would think of as the tactical side of raiding. That's the side where you think about the moment-by-moment decisions about changes in gameplay. When somebody stands in bad, things like battle reses. When somebody gets a mechanic and they're not sure what to do, helping them sort that out. When somebody has hit their cooldown and we're out of cooldowns and we need to adjust something. So maybe you have to change or shift around the use of things like Spirit Link or Bubbles or Devotion Aura, that kind of stuff. The tactical side is really in the hands of the raid leader and the position of the boss, for example. Where are we going to put the boss? Where are we going to put the raid? These are choices tactically that shift from group to group far more than even the strategic stuff, even though the strategy is really governing or guiding all of these tactical choices. If there's a giant need for healing in this section because there's a huge burst of damage that comes out, that's going to show up in the tactical side. But how you deal with it as a raid leader, which cooldowns you put where, those choices are a lot more in your hands. So there's a number of things, and we'll probably expand on them and circle back to this idea of the tactical as we go forward. But before I do that, I want to talk about what I think is the most important element of raid leading, which is this political or the social side. You're playing with people who are playing a game on their free time, and I have been in many guilds, guys, raid led by many different kinds of people, and in my view, WoW has a layer of toxicity across its raiding culture that can never really be ignored. And one of the things, if you've ever raided in a high level guild, you'll often find is it's driven by an intense type of personality, a person who's not necessarily military, but has a kind of edge to them, or a roughness, or is socially perhaps not as connected with people. There are lots of memes about this kind of thing. There are lots of caricatures of people. I want to be careful here not to, besmirch anybody. My goal is not to say I've had a horrible experience in different raiding scenarios, but I will say that the culture of raiding leans towards being toxic as just the structure of it, because you have a competitive environment, you have people who are performing at a high level, a lot of intense changes and movements, tactical stuff. They have to decide and shift their attention in all kinds of ways rapidly, and people will screw things up. And when you're doing that in a group over a 5, 6, 7 minute fight, what you often find is there's an intensity that comes into the group when somebody makes a mistake. You stood on me. You had the debuff and you stepped on me. Oh, you crossed the lines with me. Oh, you gripped me through Ashara's buzzkill line that she put. Why did you do that? There's so many ways in which a raid can become unraveled or become antagonistic toward itself, because you have 20 people, if you're doing mythic raiding, all trying to work together. And so some cultures in raiding historically have been a little more toxic than others. And even the ones that have a kind of good-natured quality to it often have divisions and niches. So the most important element of raid leading, in my view, is generally not being proficient strategically or having really good call-outs for tactics, but is being aware of the people that you're trying to lead. And I mean this in a couple of ways. The most important one is recognizing that everyone has their skills or gifts or ability, or maybe their range of engagement. And you don't want to try to tax people beyond that. You want to be able to keep a environment in your raid that is successful. Now, some of you that actually are part of these intense Giga Chad guilds where people just want to go hard, like 10 hours a day, you need a bit of an edge as a raid leader, and there is going to be a sharpness that has to come into some of your raid leading, meaning you have to tell people directly when they screwed up to get them to change. But by and large, guys, for most guilds, I think the sharpness needs to recede a little bit. And this lends itself to the tactical side, but the most important thing I can offer to you guys when you're thinking about being a raid leader is, what do you do to solve problems? And I don't mean social problems, i.e. this person doesn't like this person. That stuff in some ways is out of your grasp, and people will come to your raid or leave your raid anyways. I mean, what kind of problem solving do you do at the end of your pull, when you've just crashed or died or something like that? And let me just show you a little footage. This is really early on when we were doing, I think, Heroic Enerva, and we just finished a pull here, and I think I'm trying to raid lead from the Holy Paladin position. I'll talk about the different roles and how you can think about raid leading in a second. But I just wanted to highlight this as we get ready for another pull. What I'm thinking about as a raid leader in this moment is which parts of the fight gave us trouble and which parts of the fight gave specific people trouble. Not just a generic, how did we die, and don't stand in bad, but a specific, identifying and analyzing a specific issue that can be resolved. Here's what the main issues are that come out in a raid, guys. People's positioning, which, I'll be honest with you, from raid leader's perspective, if you watch back all the footage of your raid, people float all over the place. People are everywhere. If you're a range, if you're a hunter, if you watch your hunters, guys, we have a few hunters in here, I think. The hunter will be off by the blue. You'll watch them, they just float, because hunters, like BM hunters, MM hunters, a little bit less, they can just move all over the place. You see our chicken, he's bouncing around. Players just move all the time. People, if you're a range player, if you're a melee player, they get all over the place. And over the course of a fight, guys, all of this movement often generates really bizarre moments when there's a tactical element, there's a mechanic that you have to do, but you've been bouncing around and moving. You're not in the ideal position. How do you move from being in that position to an ideal one? And so I've chosen Enerva in part because the laser beams come out, so you'll see how people move and how that movement changes and shapes their next move to deal with a mechanic. Anyways, sometimes if you, I brought up Arcane Mage because because Arcane Mages historically have had to stand still. Kyrian, it's a little bit different now, but historically they've had to stand still and fire all the time, and that changes the way they look at the fight. So too with your raid. If you're doing raid leading, watch how people are moving. Watch where their positions are. This is going to be a significant thing to adjust for and think about in between pulls. And I don't mean, again, everyone needs to stack. I mean figuring out where someone had a problem and looking first at their position. Where were you standing? Let's get you into a more ideal position from the starting point. Because if you start on blue instead of being way over here on orange, it will make your life far easier. So the first thing, one of the biggest things to look at for raid leading when you're talking about helping people or solving problems is positioning. The second thing is mechanics. I'll tell you guys, most raiders, if you're giving a really long explanation of a raid before you do some pulls, are going to tune out. In fact, the likelihood is that most of you have tuned out of this video by now. But if you're still with me, here's the big problem with trying to dump information on your raiders about how a fight works. Generally speaking, people don't pay attention. They might listen to one or two things, but if you try to get them to hold in their mind all of the various mechanics and interactions that they have to be aware of, all the new names for this fight, it will not register for them, and they'll tune it out, and they'll just say, I'll learn it on the fly. A good portion of your raid, just think of it this way, maybe 50% of your raid is treating the fight as a learn-as-you-go moment. And so their positioning will be bad, generally speaking, to start. They will make adjustments as they go. So if they see a soak, they will go out to it immediately, so you'll have 4 or 5 people soak instead of maybe selecting a range of people to take up that mechanic. And they will die a lot. So do not, please, guys, unless you're like a world first raider and you have a crew of people who are doing insane stuff, do not spend a lot of time in between pulls in the early days of your raiding. It is the worst idea you can ever do, is to spend 10 minutes trying to assess what happened in the previous pull. What you need to do instead as a raid leader is each pull take up one thing, one problem that's pretty clear that you can solve, and move into the next pull as quickly as possible. And I'm talking everyone's dead. You hopefully had a soul stone. The soul stone goes out, people get rezzed. 5 or 6 seconds later, you're doing a ready check. People are still finishing their food, getting ready to eat. And then as you're getting going with the pull timer, 10 seconds or 15 goes off, you're just talking through to your raid about 1 or 2 items that need to be adjusted. And they need to be specific items. So you're saying, hey, this mage or this druid, I noticed on that fight you were over here, way by blue. Can you actually just reposition and be on orange? I think that'll be better for us for stacking. Hey, DH, we need to shift your CD. We want darkness actually to be a little earlier, so just be aware I'm going to call for it earlier. Hey, healers, I'm going to bump our healing CDs up a little bit. I'll call them out for you. Just be aware that I want them in a different spot. Or you weren't holding Healing Tide, Shaman. I think we'll actually need you to hold that. I mean, Healing Tide's a throughput CD, so maybe never would say that anyways. But the point is, from death to restarting the next pull, for the majority of guilds, guys, You need to do it rapidly because people have not paid attention to your 10-minute explanation of the fight. What you can do as you're moving through is you can see who has a grasp as they learn it on what's going on and who doesn't. So if positioning is number one, mechanics is number two, you want to iterate on mechanics for people. So you'll see pretty clearly who didn't get it, and as everyone's dying and rezzing, you can just ask those questions. Hey, druid or rogue, fill in the names. Actually use their names, by the way. Don't just say, hey, rogue. But you say, hey, rogue, I noticed you were out for that mechanic, or you got hit by that. Can you explain what was going on? And they might say something like, yeah, I don't really know what it was like. Like, I didn't really know what to do. Say, yep, no problem. Here's what you do. Bang, sort them out, off you go. Don't shame people. Don't yell at them. Don't freak out at them. Just give a quick thing, affirm them, and move forward. If they say something like an excuse, like, oh, well, like, this guy was in my way, kick them from your raid. Get them out of your raid. Or sternly talk to them, like, don't make excuses, and try to change that culture. Because, guys, the worst kinds of raiders you can have are people that will not admit when they screwed up. Okay? That is the absolute worst. The people who shift their blame and say, it wasn't my fault. This other person messed it up. It's their fault. Sometimes that actually happens where another person bumped you, but you'll hear it in their tone. For the folks who are actually good raiders, they'll say, yeah, I think the shaman hit me, but I could have maybe moved this. They'll be already trying to calculate a strategy for how they could have changed things to make adjust for it. And you as a raid leader can say, yeah, I know that wasn't your fault. Next time, hey, you druid that messed that up, just sidestep to the left, and then you'll sort yourselves out. And the person will be like, okay, yeah, no problem. And then that solves it. Guys, it shouldn't take very long, and you're not going to solve everything pull to pull. You'll have 15 or 20 mistakes, maybe seven of which you could have managed to survive with, but don't try to solve all 15 after each pull. Solve even one. Take the most important one mechanically that's messing up, get a good solution for that person, whether it's a positional solution, whether it's just helping them to understand exactly what they need to do for the mechanic, or whether it's helping them with some kind of utility or external. So in Enerva, for example, people have to get out to see, to do the laser beams, right? If a person's in Narnia, you might be able to grab them a Tiger's Lust or a speed boost, a feather. There's so many things that you can do to help people do the mechanics well. So be looking for ways to help with a solution. I also brought this clip up because I wanted to show you a contrast in raid leading between the different roles. So you could be a tank, you could be a healer, you can be a DPS, and still do all of the roles of guiding people. Meaning you're doing callouts that are important, you are attending to people's general health pools, you're looking at the mechanics, and your user interface makes a big difference in this regard. And you can do this from any role. Sometimes it's a little easier. Here's how I've set mine up, and this is an example of an earlier way that I went through raid leading, and I'm going to show you when I come back to my live version the adjustments I've made and some things that I've attended to even after this. So always be iterating on your user interface, but let me walk you through the main pieces that I have. Obviously, as a healer, I have a little more centralized version of our healing meters. I use Grid 2, and I've adjusted it in a number of ways to account for things to help with my attention. You can see here this was a wipe. It'll roll into the next one in a second. So what do I mean by attention? I mean physically where your eyes are drawn to on the screen, what is going to grab your attention, what things you will, generally speaking, ignore or not be able to account for. And most of us are centralized in the center portion of the screen, and everything on the periphery takes a little bit more work, or you have to have your eye angled. If you're a PvPer, you'll know this, especially because a lot of PvPers have their information just up by where I have my beacons showing there. But for the majority of us, the central lens is right around our character, almost like a circle, and information that is outside of that will be difficult for people to attend to easily. As a raid leader, having your health bars, especially as a healer, centralized is important because it's less work for you as a raid leader. Having whatever callouts that you need to make, so if you have a DBM or big wigs, having that in that circle somewhere that you can easily just flick your eyes up to and glance at and see what timings people need to be aware of, that should also be centralized. So you'll see on mine, I'll just bump it forward a bit so you can see in the fight. I have mine just to the left here. You can see the chains are coming out, and here comes the next mechanic. That's your bottle anima for charging. Here we have another one coming out. It's about 2 seconds left. So that's coming right into the center of my screen. And I would recommend, if you're raid leading, to have some version of this for your raid leading UI, that this information is really clear and accessible to you. Raid leading takes a lot of work on your brain because your mechanical stuff is, your muscle memory is all taken up with your rotational pieces, whether you're healing, DPSing, or tanking. But the other elements of listening to the callouts that are being made by others that are helping you, and the mistakes that people are making that they need attention for. So and those things are all tactical elements that your brain is requiring information for. So it's not just about being efficient in your UI in front of you. It's the fact that you're also putting a lot of your energy into your hearing as you listen to your raid and as you ask people to respond. And also you have the mechanical side of playing the game yourself physically in the match. And that's harder for some roles than others, and it's harder for some specs than others. So we'll kind of walk through that. But I do want to show you this basic layout of centralizing as a means of talking about that. I think it's useful for you to work on your UI, and let me show you what I mean by that. We'll go back here. I have open, let me just put the test, start the test bars. You can see here, here's that same function I was showing you of the test stuff showing up, first of all, overhead, so I can glance up and see what's looming. And then on the left, I have the major pieces that are coming out. On the right side, I tend to have the boss frames. So let me just see if I can shadowed UI. Let me see if I can get you a test version of this. So here, there's my arena stuff. I run my boss frames in this region over here. You can move it a little bit too. I'll talk about that. But just so you can see how busy it could be, just ignore the arena stuff. This is all centralizing everything right around my character so that I can glance with my eye left, right, to see what information is available. I also have either your weak aura set up, or this is tell me when, that is generally speaking going to do two things for you. It's either rotational stuff, so this is rotational, and then any weak auras that you make that are appropriate for the fight itself. I would recommend them up here by the health stone just above you. That tends to be a good purchase for your eye to notice a warning of that kind. So if you have debuff trackers that you're doing, maybe you have a huge mechanic that you need to avoid, and you want a weak aura for it, that's a good site for it as a raid leader. I'd encourage you to try to get a space for your bars somewhere that's centralized, because you can do a couple of things with your raid frames. You can put information into it. Sometimes we have people putting in specific health stones or potion CDs so that you can tell people to eat a health stone in a difficult moment, and you'll know who has one and who does not. This is a little bit more intense. If you watch someone like Max from Limit, I guess they're not Limit anymore, they're Liquid. He, as a external raid leader, can make use of that a lot more. It's more difficult from my experience to watch people's specific health and tell them eat a health stone, though I have done it. And when we were doing Sludge Fist, that was something I paid attention to a little bit more because some of those slams were just insane. So just glancing down every once in a while in your habits as a raid leader and seeing someone's health low, telling them, knowing maybe as a healer, knowing that there's probably not going to be someone who's going to be able to address them with triage quick enough, get them to eat a health stone. That kind of stuff is things you can do. If you do not have this centralized, guys, if it's over here, and this can be a variety of forms, like it can be narrower or whatever, then it's more difficult for your eye to go over and grab that information. But it is a personal preference thing. I do recommend every raid leader from every role have access to your full group's information. You can put defensives here too. You can see who has bubble left, who has turtle. That's kind of useful. I was thinking about huntsman before we did that. So one of the things that's important is to have the right immunities, but if people get overlapping stuff, you have to swap them out. So knowing that your frost mage is available with their ice block is pretty good, because you can say, okay, I need this guy, you sub in for the other guy, you go out, I can see you have it, or you can ask people as well. This is something you can just garner information, but remember, every time you put a request in for information, it's like talking to the government. Everybody else is also busy, going crazy, going ham, working hard. And so querying them is a good habit to get into, but querying them is also going to take a little bit of lag. So you might not get a response from everybody at the same speed. So just be aware of that. As far as the UI, other elements that I want to pay attention to, you can see here I have ERT. This is our raid tools that I think Mythic Guild originally put out. I'll just bring it up for you so you can see. I have it here in test mode so you can see what it would look like when I had a full crew of people. But you can track many different kinds of raid cooldowns. You can see here you can put them into different columns, setups. You can do many different ones. The most common ones that people use are interrupt CDs, especially for Mythic Plus. So you'll see they'll have a bar of ERT kind of up here near the group to know whose kick is ready. But I use it, generally speaking, for major cooldowns, especially healing cooldowns or raid-wide cooldowns. So that's like Shout from Warriors, Darkness from DHs, and then your array of different cooldowns, whether it's Link, Salvation, Devo Aura, that kind of stuff. These are all very useful, I've found. You saw in my previous video, if you listen to the audio, at certain points in the fight, I was asking whether my Resto Druid had held her Trank or had used it, and if I'd had access to ERT, which I did, I think pretty soon after that, I got going on ERT a little bit more with Denathrius and forward into our other prog through Mythic. It became a burden that I didn't have to put in the query. I could just check and see that it had not been used. So I find ERT is pretty valuable for keeping track of raid CDs in one glance. I would really recommend the icon idea rather than a bar. It just seems to work better for me. And but there's other things you can do too. So I also tracked for a while our personal CDs, as I said, for Huntsman. So I could see on the left I had another column set up for turtles and blocks and bubbles. You can do all kinds of things with this. You could track your damage. I sometimes would track up at the top of the screen what kinds of major DPS cooldowns were available, so especially 2-minute cooldowns. That's sometimes useful to see in a glance. Okay, we have an ad phase coming up. Who has CDs? I look up. I can send people across to deal with that. I can say, I see, instead of asking who has CDs and getting 4 answers back and then trying to decide whether that person should be sent for that mechanic or not, like going downstairs on Lich, or I guess for Anduin we'll have the same thing where people can go downstairs to kill ads. Maybe you want your boomkins to go down, but someone doesn't have CDs. That kind of stuff is really kind of relevant. Again, some of these pieces show up in the strategy side. So where Devotion Aura goes, where a boomkin's incarnation is going to be used, where this bubble is going to be placed, will eventually become strategic, meaning it will be the same every time for your group. But insofar as you're learning the fight, it actually enters in at the tactical side. So choosing who does Devo Aura versus Bubble, choosing who uses their CDs when, is something that you do as a raid leader to complement the strategy, and then that gets baked in to the way your group does it. Do you understand the difference? On the one hand, if you had no strategy, it's just the wild, wild west, and your DPS and your healers will just blow things whenever they think and are worried. But as you turn the tactical side into the strategy and get it set up nicely, people will settle in. They won't blow their CDs, especially healers. They won't respond in knee-jerk reactions. That's actually quite relevant for triage healing below the world first rating, so still cutting edge stuff. A lot of people are just pumping, right? They just want to get as much throughput as possible. Your holy priests, if they're kind of the Chad holy priest, will want to press salvation at second number 4, and the druid will be right behind him. He'll have rejuved everything, tranked into flourish, right? And you're like, whoa, guys, like we're on Ashfang. We don't need all that right now. We need you to be doing something else. So as a raid leader, you're trying to bring together all of those pieces. And in terms of UI, the ERT has been pretty valuable in my mind. So let me also talk to you about a couple of other things that I do. I'll talk about markers now. So I have, if you look at macros setups, I can't really show you actually the marker system right now, but in every raid you have a marker system where you can put down, blue, red, skull, orange, that kind of stuff. You can also mark targets with skulls and X's and those kinds of things. That's also something that's really, really, really valuable and that you add significant value to your group by doing. So I have on my mouse, and you can put these anywhere you want, keybound on like the side, kind of side mouse. I guess I could show you the mouse. So I have one of these mice, and you can see on the side of the mouse we have those little buttons there. You can do this as well. It's just on my thumb. I can go up or down and click those buttons back or forth, and those will allow me with a macro at cursor. Oh, I had the macro up here. To fire off a marker. I would tend to have 2 markers especially ready to go that you use as a tactical marker, meaning maybe the encounter has laid out 4 or 5 sets of markers so that over the course of a fight people know where to go and you can call it out. On Paintsmith, for example, I put 4 markers at each of the colors while we were learning the fight so that I could immediately say, look to green, and that would be the direction the balls are rolling from so people could see where it is and get to the side. Or look to red, and that's useful just to help people positionally. But you can also, I think, have floating markers, and these are ones where you just click with one click, and it's an at cursor macro. What is it called here? Marker skull. We'll go down, and this is marker square, so it should be M. Let me just find it here for you. That's raid targets. It's something simple like this. Marker square slash WM at cursor 6. That gives you your blue square marker on the cursor. So you don't have to get the reticle that when you press your button, it gives you the thing that you then press again. It just immediately puts the blue marker up. Really, 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 really valuable, guys. Why? Because people will respond to directions to a marker. Go to blue, and you just put blue up, it immediately flashes in their eyes. They can all see it and go to it. Go to the stairs is a little more vague. There's all kinds of stairs in this game. Look, there's stairs over here. And these stairs are different from the stairs in the dungeon. Or go to the entrance. There's entrances in all kinds of fights, in all kinds of arenas. Go to the middle, even sometimes, is disorienting for people because they have to figure out where they are and relative to the middle. But if you say go to blue, go to orange, and you lay it out for them like a pathway, and you can say even preemptively, we're going to start at blue, and then we're going to move towards orange. These kinds of cues are really helpful for raiders. And so I would encourage you, if you're going to do some raid leading, have your suite of markers that you're going to use, and maybe they can also be bound, it's your choice, ready to go for the main things. So pick your favorite color that you want to be your go-to marker for the tactical side. That's in-game changes in decision, in-game callouts that you can immediately put down as an emphasis for what you want people to be doing. So Halandras is probably going to be a good example of this, or the snake boss coming up in 9.2, where he has the tunnel where he's going to come up and blow everyone up, getting people to that marker because people are all over the place as they move through that fight. Or for Halandras, I think I'm not sure if they're changing it, but it used to be that there were these pillars swinging around, and the tank had to make it hit the pillar. You can be marking it with a changing marker that's going along. You can just say, guys, kill blue, kill blue, kill blue right now. Or as people are trying to figure out the shapes, right? We got circle, a kind of star, and I don't know what the other one was. You can just mark them out. You can say, circle on blue, and the person has a circle on their head. They're looking to try to discern what the differences between those two kind of slightly brown shapes are. But you put a blue marker down for them, or an orange marker, or a red marker down for them, they will see it and they'll be like, okay, I know where I need to go. This is also true for marking targets. And here we have skull marker. It's amazing, guys, how much you can get done as a raid leader. And this was great for us. We were on Sylvanas. And sorry, I should finish that. How much you can get done just by putting a marker on a target. On Sylvanas Phase 2, when you're coming into those sections and you got the myriad of dudes, we struggled to focus fire down the big guys. And we kind of determined which one we wanted to kill first. But it wasn't until we marked them, we started to mark them a little more carefully, that people saw skull and poured their damage into it. If you do not mark targets for people within a group, they will, generally speaking, especially the raiders in the range of like lower cutting edge and down, they're just going to blast. They'll do AoE. They won't focus anything down because it's the most efficient thing to do, and it gets the biggest numbers, guys. But raiding is about kind of focusing your attention. So make sure you have easy to access marker tools or macros to do one button marking. And this can be mouse over as well. In this case, it's not mouse over for me, so I just select things and mark them by the press of a button. But you can do this in many different ways. Have at least two. You want at least skull and cross. Cross is traditionally the marker for off kill, so you are killing skull, and then the next one is going to be cross. That's generally how raiders think. But you also probably want something like moon, which has traditionally been polymorph targets or CC targets. So if you have at least three, I would say two are a must-have, because you can always plan strategically for poly targets, but sometimes you're shifting your damage orientation. Skull and cross are good, and then maybe something like moon. Have those ready to go as a raid leader. And those kinds of marking tactics, guys, I find to be exceptionally valuable, especially if you're in the raid. It's easier if you're an external raid leader to direct people's attention to kill targets, because you can just say it over and over and over again. Please kill us, kill this, kill this, kill this. And then you can immediately pivot to be like, this guy, eat a Hellstone. This guy, your CD's coming up. An external person doesn't also have the burden of playing. So use these tools because you're in game, and it will help you think through strategically, or tactically, where your group is going next. I also want to talk a little bit about the differences in raid leading from different roles. So I've led raids as healer, DPS, and tank. I have raided as healer, DPS, and tank. Just in general, outside of the raid leading stuff, I've actually just raided as them. And they offer very, very different types of focus. I want to begin this section by emphasizing, if you do not know the various classes in this game and the different specs and the different utility or tools or talents that they offer, you should take an opportunity to learn them, or lean on somebody who does know. Here's why. It is very difficult to give people advice about how they need to change in their behavior in a fight to overcome an obstacle if you don't know what their kit offers them. You might know, yeah, they're a ranged DPS, just deal with it. But there's a difference between knowing that and having played a mage. And knowing how a mage plays compared to a shadow priest or a warlock. Those are, or a boomkin. Those are different classes in terms of how they conceive of movement through a fight. And as a raid leader, it's valuable for you to know that when you're talking and trying to find a solution for a mage as far as positional stuff, that blink is a tool in the raid leader's mind that you get to use. Blink for you is a solution. It's not just a button. And they've been used to using blink just as, oh, I need to get here, I'll use that. But you can focus their attention and say, save blink until that moment. That's your takeaway from this pull. You have blink, you've been using it just kind of whenever you think you need to. Let's get you to use that. Or alter time. Alter time is a tool that mages have. Did you know that? Alter time puts them back in that position. So just say to them, okay, at that point, I need you to use alter time. Say, I don't care, you can use alter time before, but you have to have it up for that part. Get over to blue where this marker is, press your alter time, get out, and then come back. That's what I want you to focus on. That's great direct advice to that person that you know because of the class that you're playing. That you know because you've been able to play many different classes. So when you're raid leading from a DPS point of view, obviously the mechanics of your damage profile, so learning how to play it and play it well is primary. You have to have the muscle memory before you can raid lead. You will do less damage because your raid leading will draw down your ability to perform perfectly, so just be aware of that. But you also need to set an example by anticipating mechanics in the right way. So if you're a warlock, that means good use of gates. Sometimes gates become extremely strategic, so we have to have a gate here or else everyone dies, like on, what's the second last boss in EP where you got Psychus beating the tar out of you and the pie shapes are going. You come up out of the tunnel and then you have to take a gate almost immediately across the first pie or everyone dies. That's what we call a strategic gate, where you cannot move the gates. It has to be there. You can use it before that a little bit. You know, you have a certain CD, but it cannot be changed. Fine. Warlocks also have access to Circle, or if you don't want Circle, if you can absorb the damage, Dark Pact. Right? These are tools that you as a raid leader can attend to when you're thinking about how to solve a problem for a given character. If their problem is, I can't find on the Anduin fight, I can't find my matching person to get rid of this debuff. So you get split into light and dark, and they have to merge. But if you hit the wrong one, or you hit somebody without it, it blows up and almost kills everybody. That, guys, is a tactically positional problem to solve. And if your warlock is saying to you, is blowing people up a couple times in a row, they haven't figured out how to manage their stuff. So what can you do? You can say to them, okay, I don't know where you are in the fight at that point, but as soon as it happens, I need you to get out of kind of mid-range or melee, and I need you to be on the edge. You're just a liability. You're not quick enough, so we're going to have people come to you. Put a circle out back here, and then as soon as the mechanic happens, press your circle, keep DPSing. We'll have one of the boomkins or a mage blink over and find you. Instead of this warlock running like a chicken with his head cut off all over the place trying to find people, or running into melee and blowing the tar out of folks. If the same is true for warriors. Warriors have leap, so in that kind of a mechanic, you can be looking to leverage those skills that a warrior has, or intervene to people. Super dangerous for that kind of mechanic. You intervene and cross paths and blow the tar out of someone, not good. So what you can say to your warriors are, get it, there's going to be a pile of people in melee, leap out when this mechanic is happening, and then go and find a warlock or somebody who's immobile, and then get back to the fight. Those are things that a shaman can't do, right? Or a rogue stepping to someone is a little dangerous, right? But they could get out and step back in. So as long as you know if you've played DPS, all of the various pressure points and the tools that each of the classes has, you as a raid leader can offer direct solutions rather than just generalized crap about don't get hurt or don't get hit or stop blowing each other up. You can provide a precise solution. You can say, okay, we're going to use Windrush here to get our melees out so there's enough space. We're going to use Roar here from a druid. Which druid? It's going to be you. This is who I want to do it. Do Roar at that point. You got it? Good. Move forward. So as a DPS raid leader, you will be far more attentive to downtime. So times when the mechanics or the tactical choices that you are making as a raid interfere with your ability to do damage. And that's a good feeling because you will then adjust things for DPS. But then your healers are going to be like, wait a minute, like we seem to be taking a crap load of damage suddenly in this strategy or this tactic. Why is that? And the truth is because you have been delaying, resolving a mechanic, or you have been, you know, putting people all together when there's an amplification of damage. So you've been stacking people so that your ranged DPS don't have to move, or you have been not moving the boss so that your melee can actually do damage. But in not moving the boss, that has created a situation where a bunch more damage is going out. For example, and we may see this again in Halandras or a few other fights, but if you remember on Huntsman, you have the dogs in the last part of that fight, and the final dog, I forget what the name of it is, it did a pulse amount of damage, so you had to move it periodically. But moving bosses for melee DPS is so bad. They want to be able to stick with it. Usually what I mean by that is moving it dramatically. So moving it across an arena is annoying for melee DPS who are trying to do things. You move it out of your warrior's Kyrian circle. You move it out of that kind of stuff. It's annoying for range to some degree as well, but they can adjust to it. A melee DPS has to follow you. And so if you had kept that boss still and the dog still, you can have more uptime, but the dog's going to ramp in its damage when you do finally move it. So it's balancing those elements. And if you play as a DPS raid leader, just know you will be leaning probably more towards giving yourself efficient paths for damage dealing because that's the role you're in, and you will be probably paying less attention to your healers and your tanks just naturally. So try out each of the roles if you can to see what that's like. Tanking. Tanking is one of those roles from raid leading that is difficult when you're in there because of the positional requirements often put on tanks, meaning you're stuck against a wall. Does anyone remember tanking in Castle Nathria? You spent a lot of time with your back against a wall getting, smashed, especially like Sludge Fist, right? Trying to manage the space for those earthquakes. Your back is against the wall. You're right beside your co-tank. You cannot see anything going on in ranged land. You don't know which melees are where. So tanking provides an extra layer of complication from a raid leader's perspective when it comes to positional requirements. It's harder for you unless you have a video feed of someone else alongside it that you can glance at in between pulls. It's harder for you to come up with solutions that are not abstract because you will just not be able to see, generally speaking, half of your raid or your ranged characters. Now, that doesn't mean it's a bad role to lead from. There are some advantages which include your ability to pivot and change tactical choices, especially where the boss is. I don't know how many times I've yelled at our tanks, move the boss. We need to move the boss over to blue. And maybe I'm ranged, or maybe I'm playing a healer. And there's a lag there. So even if they're competent and they understand why you're telling them to do that, if you're not the tank, it's harder to immediately resolve those tactical issues of getting the boss to X for whatever reason. So in general, though, I would encourage you not to, if you can help it, not to raid lead from the tank position, but it's still quite doable. And there's one advantage to it beyond the fact that you can make some swifter tactical adjustments with the positioning, is you do get a little bit more leverage or time to pay attention to the raid in general, and you can do a little bit more callouts. So generally speaking, when you're in a raid, you want to have a few people, probably officers if you can, that are trusted with specifically rotational callouts. So things like interrupts. That's something that you want to set up strategically and then have another individual watching over it and calling them out. So you'll have usually a DPS, so somebody who's leading part of that group. Just think of it as your SWAT team for interrupts. If it's a shaman, all the better, because their interrupts the best. It's at ranged and it's a short CD. So you have 3 or 4 people in a rotation for this mob. You have 3 or 4 people in a rotation for that mob. They are led hopefully by a couple officers who are doing callouts for either one, who can say, bang, I'm done, you're up next. Bang, I'm done, you're up next. That way, as a raid leader, you don't have to directly address it. It is okay to do that, and if you're in the tank position, that's something that you can do a little bit more of. You can say, you can kind of operate within that realm. As a healer, it's more difficult, and as a DPS, it's more difficult, because the pressure of, on the healing side, attending to meters and keeping people alive and triaging, and on the DPS side, planning out your rotation, take a little bit more weight. As a tank, you can screw things up, you can get hit, and generally speaking, you're not going to die in World of Warcraft. Denathrius was a little bit different, because he would swat the tanks, and if you turn your back to him as you're moving him around, you get completely clapped for his triple strikes. So there's been some bosses where that happens, but generally there's a cadence to tanking. When you're off tanking and not dealing with the boss directly because you haven't taunt swapped, you have a little more breathing room to look around. So as a tank, I would take up a little bit more of those tactical duties, especially interrupt orders. That's something that you can take charge on. But the hardest I found actually wasn't tanking, but it was healing. It was being a raid leader in the fights as a healer, and that's because of the nature of triage healing. What do I mean by triage? I mean healing that is of an emergency nature, where you're heading to your flash healing, your regrowths, your quick heals, your responsive healing, and you've moved away from the cadence of your regular throughput healing. So this is definitely dependent upon your healing comp, because different healers are going to offer you more or less ability to triage, and different healing cores are going to respond to triage or emergency measures in different ways. Meaning, sometimes you'll have a group where you have a druid and an H-priest or a mistweaver, and they are panicked. They are panicked. They are going to triage immediately. If they see someone drop, they're going to hit them with a big button right away. You know every time that that's their go-to. That's their habit. As a raid leader from a healing perspective, you can adjust your healing profile to serve the needs of the raid. If you know you have people who are like triage happy, who are going to hit that trigger and potentially waste mana or move into that role, you can operate in a different manner. You can say, okay, I'm going to actually lean far more towards just general throughput, because I know if triage happens, this person is going to spike to it. Or maybe you say, you know what, I'm going to play my Holy Paladin as a Martyr Holy Paladin, because Martyr is one of the premier efficient ways of doing triage healing. So I'm going to do that because my group is really solid at throughput, but what we really lack is somebody who can fill the gaps when a person dips below, or pick up targets one by one. Because if you have a Holy Priest who's doing insane single target throughput with basically triage heals, then maybe you don't need that. So from the healing perspective, learning what the core is doing and adjusting your style as a raid leader to complement it, even though it'll be worse on the meters, is a vital part. In fact, in every one of these roles, although it's really felt in healing, DPS, tank, or heals, what you're trying to do as a raid leader is complement things as best you can. That means taking up the hardest work. So on the tanking duties, in the most difficult parts of the fight where everyone's brain is taxed, you need to be prepared to take up the lion's share of the work, tanking while directing traffic. as a healer, when it's you want to put your CDs in the most useful place, which is not always to get four divine hymns in, but it is the place that is of most need when it's tightest, when people are dying, when you need organization. You want to find you want to place your stuff where you can trust that it's going to be taken care of. That's why if you're going to play a raid healer, I recommend Resto Shaman. The reason why is Resto Shaman has a play style with Rain and Riptides that is really consistent, even with the 4-piece coming up with a chain heal focused, which you can do if you want, but it doesn't really matter. The tools that Resto Shaman offer include both heavy utilities, so Windrush Totem stuff is amazing, but also Spirit Link Totem, right? Spirit Link Totem is almost a must-have in any raid comp. It is so strategically vital that having it can transform the way any group does their work. But as a raid leader, you can put your Spirit Link and just calm everybody down. Healers get really intense when everyone's dying and people freak out. DPS freak out. They start to, use their health stones and potions, and they start to try to figure out ways to survive. They move around far more. They don't trust that they're going to survive in that moment. As a Resto Shaman, you can find the worst part of the fight, and you can basically nullify it and resolve it. You could do Martyr Holy Paladin as well if you really think you need the triage, like you're happy with the throughput side of your group, and that also is a kind of smoothing effect, because people will not, when their health spikes and they immediately get healed, they know that someone's there and they know that they're going to be resolved. That kind of work as a raid leader from a healing perspective, really, 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 really good. We actually did it to some degree as a tank when we were doing our progress in Sylvanas, because you can take giant Word of Glories with, I think it's Selfless Healer or one of the talents. Essentially, it makes your Word of Glory hit for missing health based on a percentage. So it's almost a lay on hands when someone's basically dead. So from the tank role, if you're playing Paladin, you can also lean towards triaging. If your healing core is good on throughput but suffers with triage, you can adjust and move a little bit away from damage. Shield of the Righteous actually doesn't do a ton of damage anyways. But you can fill some of your GCDs on monitoring or triaging the entire raid. So that's an overview, guys, of the role side of raid leading. The main takeaways for me are whichever role you are in is going to bias your tactical choices. So be aware of that. If you're playing a DPS class as a raid leader, you will be blind in part to some of the giant issues that are going on in your raid when it comes to the healing side or the tanking needs. Maybe the tanks have no clue what's going on, or they're super stressed, or they have to get all the way across the map because you're telling them where to go and it works for you as a DPS player, but they are having struggles. Try and have these conversations and see where people are at. Finally, I just want to say more generally, the more knowledge you have as a raid leader, whether it's of the specs, as I was just talking about it, in your raid, and what they offer the group as far as utility, or what kind of constraints they put on a player, whether it is the raid mechanics themselves and understanding what immunities work, which ones do not, how the fight lines up from minute to minute. Maybe the 2-minute CDs of your DPS don't really work because of the way the fight functions, whether it's the positional requirements, how much movement is going on, or whether it's your personnel. So the morale of your people, are they feeling like they're being successful or heard? Are they feeling like they're getting defeated either by the mechanics, or they feel like their class is not performing very well and they don't know why? These are things that you all need to attend to as a raid leader, because when your players are having fun and blasting and enjoying themselves and getting it, the raid feels great to be a part of. It's one of the really unique elements of a pastime that is kind of like a sport, but also like a bar at the same time. It's like everyone's hanging out at the bar, but you're also competing at a high level. And it's enjoyable. It's amazing. I love it. But when the morale is crappy and people are at each other, when people don't understand what's going on, or you don't have a clue what's going on, or you're just making these broad general statements with a harshness to it, like stop screwing this up, guys, or like this is easy, you guys should understand what's going on. These kinds of things, guys, will wreck and rip apart a guild. Your advice to people, your changes need to be understandable, specific. They need to be tailored to their class and spec, something that they can actually accomplish. And your attitude when you're talking through a raid, it needs to be uplifting. You need to tell people you did a good job here. You need to ask them politely. They're human beings. I mean, you can have an edge. I get it. You don't have to ask please and say thank you every time in a raid. I just mean like your general tone toward them needs to be one that approves and is encouraging. It's so easy, guys, to have one negative thing completely destroy your experience of a raid, even if you did 100 things really well. That's my take on raid leading. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave any comments that you have, and I'll try to answer any questions that you have, whether it's about comps that you're running or specific questions about how to deal with people as a raid leader or how to think about recruiting. I didn't really talk about that stuff too much, but I hope it's kind of implied by some of the advice I gave throughout. Anyways, good luck in 9.2, and we'll see you guys again next time.